Testing.
Yeah.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Town Hall. We're going to get things underway here tonight. We're going to hear from Able City East, presentation regarding zoning amendments, particularly form-based code associated with Old Tower Hill Road. Our first order of business, as always, is the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on the agenda is the land acknowledgement statement. The town of South Kingstown pays homage to the indigenous people and land in which the town is now located. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder of our ongoing efforts to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Narragansett tribe, whose land and water we benefit from today. All right, we're going to dive right into it. I'm going to hand it over to Jim Manning to give us a brief introduction before we go into the presentation. But before we start, I just want to say happy birthday, Jim. We appreciate you joining us on this night for this work session.
65, I'm older than dirt, so thank you. No place I'd rather be. Tonight's a work session on the form-based code, and Jamie Rabbit I'll hand it to him. He's our planning director. He's worked a lot of hours along with Brian and Tracy, one of our newest employees. Welcome, Tracy, to your first meeting, I think, right? So Jamie, I'll turn it over to you. But one last thing, it's supposed to be a 30-minute presentation. It's about 102 pages. But I told him to fly through it. Jamie promised me it would be 30 or less, so let's see if he keeps his word on that. So, Jamie, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
I don't remember 30, I remember 40 or less. But we will do our best to keep it as concise and as short as possible to allow the council adequate time for questions, answers, and discussions. Again, we absolutely appreciate the fact that you took an extra evening out of your busy schedule to hold this workshop. This is something that the town has been pondering for almost 20 years through 5 planning directors, and hopefully we're in a place where we can bring it over the finish line for you. It's been a long-standing ordeal. We have with us tonight Jason King from Able City East. We also will have Sean Bourgeois from Dedalius Group, who will zoom in and do his presentation remote and will be available for questions and answers as we move through the process. Again, I'm not going to take any additional time. I'd like to turn it over to Jason King. We have a number of slides to go over tonight. There are 2 slides we made changes to, but we'll have full digital slides available tomorrow for the public. If you go to the town's webpage, we'll have something there that'll direct you to a full slide presentation this evening. So again, thank you for your patience with us, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. So I'd like to introduce Jason King from Able City East.
Jamie, before you start, given the fact that it's 102 pages, when you hit the point where the changes were made, if you can just point that out.
I will attempt to do so. A lot. We say 102 slides. A lot of these are 10-second slides. So we should be able, meaning Jason King and Sean Bourgeois, should be able to go through the slides in a very timely manner. A lot of them you've seen already. So thank you.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for having us. It's always a pleasure to be here in South Kingstown. So again, my name is Jason King with Able City. I was the project director for the consultant team. Let's see. Trying to advance the slides.
It worked. Now
it's not working. There it goes.
Okay, what's that? Got now it's great. All right, terrific. So very briefly, we'll talk about the process that got us here. We'll talk about what a form-based code is. We'll talk about the specific design guidelines and architectural standards that we're proposing. What's new is that there's a code testing. Every time we've given a presentation, we've said that this form-based code, if adopted, would be good financially for the town and for the individual property owners and applicants. And what the planning department and council charged us with was to prove that. And so we'll spend some time looking at different areas under the existing code versus under the form-based code. What's the return on investment? We'll talk a little bit about the applicability of the code, how it would actually apply, and then it's the question and answer period, which is so important. So this is sort of the timeline, and it starts with 20 years ago. Since I was a student at the University of Rhode Island, you've heard this before, Old Tower Hill Road has looked largely like it does, and it's been a conversation for a long time about the next step for that area. Business survey was done in 2018. University of Rhode Island students, landscape architecture students have been engaged in order to imagine that area. The Economic Development Commission has been working with planning for quite some time. And then it was in the summer of 2023 and 2024, myself and my previous firm, Dover Colin Partners, we got to lead the team and lead the conversation when it came to Old Tower Hill Road. Let's see. So you remember the plan, and a lot of you are in these pictures. You remember the conversation we had around base maps, starting from nothing, community image surveys. From that, we created plans and renderings, goals, policies, action items, and the Old Tower Hill Road plan is sort of sets the foundation for what we're doing. We had a charrette, multiple days. I think in total, we were able to talk to over 300 people during that charrette, individual people. If you count all the people that came into the charrette space, people coming with different hats, different messages, different conversations, we were able to have at least 600 people engage with us that week, which was pretty exciting. And then you'll remember this. Let's go here. There were the one-word cards. So one way of getting the temperature of the room, we ask one word that comes to mind about Old Tower Hill Road now and in the future, and people wrote down words. And Old Tower Hill Road area now, one word that came to mind about the area now, and you saw, ugly and strip mall and parking lot, uninviting commercial. So the more times someone said that word, the larger it appears. Now, I have to say, though, I remember, there's a lot of great new structures down there. The Starbucks, the grocery store, the CVS. It actually has changed quite a bit in a positive direction. There's the bike lanes, there's wider sidewalks. So I always had a hard time with this slide because it sort of, it doesn't speak to how much the area has already evolved. Nevertheless, when we asked about one word that comes to mind about the area in the future, you saw mixed use and walkable and green, vibrant, useful, local, pedestrian. So that's, like we talked about, the mission statement for the project in a lot of ways came out of this one-word card exercise. So it was nice. The Rhode Island chapter of the American Planning Association just last year gave this plan an award for excellence. Thanks to Maria's leadership, she said this is a really good plan and people should know about it. And sure enough, there were many people applied for this award, and this project was granted the award. So from the Old Tower Hill Road neighborhood plan, then the first recommendation of that plan was to create a new land development regulations and new zoning. And so immediately we followed up with the draft regulations. We actually had it as an appendix item right in the Old Tower Hill Road plan to get the conversation started. And then in July, we did the code workshop. We had the key pages from the code around the room. We had the renderings. We took input from the public, from yourselves, from appointed committees, We revised the plan and we created a new draft to the code. To back up a little, what is it we're doing ultimately? We're trying to create a walkable public realm by regulating the form of buildings, streets, and public spaces. We're trying to upgrade the buildings, streets, and public spaces of the Old Tower Hill Road area. We've been talking about how different areas throughout New England have adopted either full form-based codes of the kind that we're considering here, or form-based code controls, form-based code additions, partial ordinances, hybrid codes. And we needn't go through that list. I had a chance to take a tour of communities that I've been working in around the Boston area for over 20 years. And there's a whole other presentation we could give about successes for the form-based codes and the built work that sort of reaffirm this kind of exercise. In short, the form-based code unlocks development potential. It does so by providing clear, predictable rules. The code doesn't contradict itself in several places. The code is short compared to land development regulations. The code has a lot of pictures and a lot of graphics. People should know what's possible on their land, and neighbors should have an idea of what's coming just by looking through. It increases property and land value. In that, walkable areas tend to outperform conventional areas. This is the places where we vacation, we spend our weekends. It supports local business group growth. It's working to sort of fill storefronts. It gives businesses the opportunity to upgrade in ways that they're not able to currently, frozen in time by development regulations that haven't been updated in quite a while. It improves municipal fiscal health by adding tax revenue per acre. And a form-based code is very resilient. It's more concerned about form than on use. Uses change as the markets change, as the economy changes, and the code is more adaptable. So that's the code. You've had it. We talked about the form-based zoning districts. These are just zoning districts with form as the primary design metric. This is the map that we've talked about in a few different instances. This is the map overlaid atop an aerial, and we've had a chance to talk to multiple property owners. We've created an illustrative master plan of what the build-out of the area could look like using these zones. We've had different conversations about sort of feathering the development from the center near Route 1, getting sort of smaller and smaller, more and more human scale to match Main Street. Ultimately, though, our zones have remained pretty consistent. So there's the Route 1 area, which is the highest and the densest, and then we make our way down to the FB1, the residential neighborhoods, so that way like faces like, single-family houses face single-family houses. Within the form-based code, there's this, and these are just pictorial representations of land development regulations. You have land development regulations in place already. These attempt to make things like the sides, the setbacks, or the coverages, or the way the buildings address the street easier to understand. And so these are the kind of metrics we've been tweaking one draft after another, trying to get the Build 2 zone so that way it's in keeping with local character. We've been tailoring things like setbacks. We've added to the rear setbacks after conversations with neighbors. An important part of this is the frontage build-out. Every building is required to front the street and to fill it out, to create outdoor rooms, long continuous street walls that shape the public realm. And the planning department has been testing the code themselves. This is one of those graphics, following the rules and translating it into a virtual model, like we would have built in architecture school. And you can see the different layers. You can see the storefront bottom layer, probably around 25 feet. You can see each layer above. It could be residential, it could be office, 14 feet. And then the code allows for architectural embellishment for design, things like belvederes or cupolas, sort of free, to make that more likely that these interesting little, ornaments will occur. A form-based code differs, however, from land development regulations and zoning in that it's very, very concerned with the streets. You can't reduce a setback and create less space between cars and front doors unless you're also creating walkable, mixed-use, multimodal streets. So the code has a variety of street sections that developers would use as they'd redevelop large sites. And each one of these sections has sidewalks. A lot of them have bike facilities. There's planting strips. There's spots for lighting. We talk about slowing lanes in certain areas, not along Old Tower Hill Road, but in the new streets that would be created, the perpendicular main streets. So that was a quick recap. There were certain sites that have been discussed frequently in our conversation with the public. 121 Old Tower Hill Road is one. At the corner of Narragansett and Old Tower Hill Road, here's a map, it shows a picture. So this is a site that's a very visible corner location. It's the former Berkshire Bank property. And so, when you look at these sites now, a lot of times it's really just a small structure surrounded by a lot of parking. And that was created by the land development regulations. That site was only allowed to develop on 30% of its site. And so what do you do with the rest? You turn it into parking. It's the easiest way to deal with it. So there's this. And what is this lacking? It's lacking a continuous street wall. It's safe, there's a sidewalk, but it isn't comfortable. You're out, as a pedestrian, the wind, the rain, and it certainly isn't interesting. There's nothing to look at as you pass these long expanses of asphalt. So we took the site like this, we drew the existing conditions, yellow, rather pink for the box of the existing building. We measured it, we counted the parking spaces, and ultimately the bottom line when it comes to why this code unlocks development potential is because under the current regulations, again, your building envelope, your buildable lot area, your lot coverage can only be 30% of the site, and this is as much area as you're really able to build in. And the form-based code expands that. So the same site, under the existing regulations, we'll go back and forth a little. Under existing regulations, you're only able to build in this bit of area. And under the form-based code, that building envelope expands really dramatically. Now, we give the developer the ability to build on more of the site, but we ask for much more from them. We ask for open space. We ask for a building that addresses the street with storefronts and with awnings. We are reducing the required number of parking spaces in certain instances, but we're asking that the building adopt an architectural look that's proud and that's interesting and that's in context with its neighbors. So again, Sean Bourgeois, our economist, is going to sort of the highlight of the evening. You get to hear from him as he talks about return on investment on these properties. But this is the image that sums it up. We're letting developers build on more. And in so doing, we're making these properties more profitable and more likely to redevelop. So, we could spend a lot of time on those images. But to summarize, under the existing regulations, new development is in the form of a box set back 40 feet from the road. And you would be so unlikely to redevelop. That's why a lot of these buildings have been there for 30 years, because you're only allowed a very small increase in commercial square footage. No one tears down a one-story, no one tears down a one-story 4,000 square foot building if all they can build back is a one-story 4,000 square foot building. We're giving density in order to encourage redevelopment. Under the proposed form-based code, twice as much commercial development is allowed, That's good for the town's tax base. And the thing that makes the difference, the thing that makes this irresistible in a lot of ways for developers, is that we're allowing residential units to incentivize the development. But it's not just to incentivize the development. In order to create a walkable mixed-use area, we need a residential population that lives within walking distance. So we're giving residential units, and that helps with a return on investment, but we're also doing that in order to create vibrant places that have people visiting shops that don't need to bring their car. And so what if? The planning department was testing the code. They're imagining what could look like on this site. Ghosting it in, right? We don't want to be too obsessed with the details because the code, these things, there's a lot of different design solutions. But nevertheless, you know, we're looking at a building that that addresses the street with windows and with awnings. That's got places for people to sit. There's lighting, there's trees, and there's an architectural vocabulary that we all recognize. There's dormers and windows. It's possible that other variations could happen. We talked about how this area doesn't just have the coastal or Victorian look. It also very much has the American mercantile, sort of the look that came from the factories and the mills. And so this kind of thing is also possible. There's plenty of windows. There's a cornice line. There's a door surround, which gives it a visible, like, you know, where you're entering, where you're leaving the building. Just a couple more of these, and then what we do is we'll have the economist explain how he sees these projects. The next site is 51 Main Street and Holly Street. This is around the Citizens Bank area. You know, this is what it currently looks like. And there we are again. This is what was built. This is what's currently there, the box surrounded by parking. Under the new regulations in this area, however, let's go here. Under the existing regulations in this area, the building height could go up. More retail is allowed than is currently there. So there's currently a gain. However, on the form-based code, but it's probably not enough to incentivize that place to change. Under the form-based code, much more is allowed. The building height goes up to 3 stories. So again, there's a cap on how high structures can go. The amount of retail increases, residential units are allowed, and that one is able to mix the commercial spaces with the residential and share parking spaces in order to accomplish parking requirements. I know this is moving pretty quickly, but at 36 to 40 Holly Street, we have 2 commercial structures, one probably a former house on the left, another relatively new commercial structure. This is a large site. You know, this is a site you've been talking about for a while. This is a site whose owner is interested in doing something. Something is going to come here. Under the existing code, with a really good designer, it wouldn't be too bad. Under the commercial neighborhood zoning district that's currently there, it's a mix of townhomes and duplexes and multifamily. It's a variety, different housing units for different kinds of people, and parking spaces. Let's see. All right, but let's go to this. This is, I think, the image that we understand best. Under the form-based code, things change quite dramatically on this site. Now the building is filling the site. Now the envelope is increased, the building coverage is increased, and the building comes up to the street. The new dining area, commercial areas are within conversation distance to the sidewalk. Last site, Site 3. This is 32 to 36 Old Tower Hill Road. This is the True Value. It's a building that's got a lot of different uses. True Value, Go Pasta, Twisted Pizza. Here's what the structure currently looks like. These are like valued institutions. We hope that these is, another way of going, we want to preserve these. We want to allow these businesses to continue. But at the same time, we recognize that it's a dynamic environment. Currently, that building, under the existing regulations, a commercial highway, it would be very hard for it to change very much. Actually, in fact, if they wanted to do anything at that site, they would have to decrease the amount of retail from 22,000 square feet down to 15,000. So imagine that. In order to be code compliant, they would actually have to lose square footage. And of course, no one would ever decide to do that. Under the form-based code, the building height is 3 stories. The commercial square footage goes from 15,000 square feet allowed to 25,000 square feet allowed. And suddenly there's quite a bit of residential is possible on that site. So new commercial development, in the case of this project, in case of this site, it's still a building in keeping with the character of the area, but there's double the square footage. There's possibilities that it could achieve its full potential. Right. So what if? What if more of the area looked like this? Less of the slab on grade concrete boxes with flat roofs that characterize the area, and more structures that looked like something colonial revival, maybe. All right. So hopefully Sean still has time. Sean, let me turn this over to you. Are you able to hear us, Sean?
Just bear with us. We have to change over from live to remote.
While we're changing over, so again, we're showing pictures of these structures, they're boxes, and we're turning them into beautiful Victorian structures, 2 stories with dormers, and the owners of these properties get nervous. They're like, how can I do that? How does this possibly make sense financially? How can I go from this box, which generates income, to this grand thing that you want us to do? And the answer is they're able to build on 70% more of their site, and that's the key. That's what I'm trying to communicate.
Just have to release you from the air team.
When we rehearsed this, it was seamless.
While we do that, let me just introduce Sean. So by way of introduction, Sean went to Harvard Business School. Sean's family has been investing. They've been building predominantly in the Louisiana area. His family builds affordable housing. His family builds commercial properties. So this isn't academic for Sean. This is all stuff that he does all the time. His company, Daedalus, is an economic consultancy that travels all around the country, all around the world. But still, it's him and it's his dad, and they're still building things. And that has always, in my mind, given Sean a real legitimacy. Sean, can you hear us? Sean speaks German. He speaks Arabic. This is true. Sean, I'm killing time. Please join us.
Killing time, huh? That sounds excellent.
Turn off.
Tell me when you're ready for my slides.
You sound great.
Excellent.
You should be good, Sean.
Good to go,
Ready?
Sean.
All right. Let's share screen. Can you see my slides now?
Yeah, we do.
All right. So Sean Bourgeois with Daedalus Advisory Services, and I get the pleasure of walking you through a bunch of math about all the sites that presumably Jason and Jamie have walked you through. So thank you for allowing me the time to explain it. And hopefully it's a lot of fun, because math is fun, right? So let's talk about commercial real estate before we get too much farther. You know, when we look at the different sites that we're going to talk about and examine them under a form-based code, it's easy enough when we're talking about for sale properties to understand mechanically, if I sell something for more than I built it for, then I made money. For cash flowing real estate, though, often the math is a little more opaque, and there's some nuances that often get lost in the shuffle. So, it's worth spending a few minutes on this. And the first one's actually really funny. Don't laugh. There are funny things in real estate math. So the first thing is commercial real estate starts with gross potential rent, which is a strange concept. Imagine if McDonald's started their income statement by estimating how many burgers they could have sold that day. That's how real estate works. They look at the quantum of stuff that they've built and try to figure out how it gets monetized. So in a way, you can think of it as a capacity-constrained income machine, right? You've got a box, you've got to make use of it. And I want you to hold that thought in your mind, because a lot of what we're going to talk about today mathematically is just this concept at the level of the Old Tower Hill Road study area, right? Our focus is really about how you can get assets that already exist to be maximally used in the most productive way possible. And so that's what we're going to do. So our gross potential rent, we take out what we don't collect, and that gets us to effective gross income, which is what we did collect. We take out all the operating expenses, and we get to something that you're going to see me talk about a lot. It's called net operating income, NOI. Anyone on the council or in the public session who works in real estate knows this term. If you don't work in real estate, you'll hear this, thrown around constantly. So you can either impress your kids with this newfound knowledge, as they call you bro, as mine do every 2 seconds, or pass it along. But net operating income shows you not only how much you made, but it's used in a bunch of evaluations about how productive your real estate asset is. When you compare it to what it cost you to build something, did it make sense? What's the value of that asset when you go to sell it? So it's a critical concept for us to understand, okay? It's important to caveat this, and sorry about the wall of text. I'm gonna simplify it for you, but it's important to know that when you see numbers, we're making good faith projections on things that don't yet exist, right? So you've seen some of the images, and conceptually, you understand that these things could exist in the future under the code, but there's a lot of things that have to happen for those images to be correct. So when we quantify those images, we're aiming to be directionally correct, right? So we want to make sure that we're broadly in line with the market, that we're using good inputs for rules of thumb for debt and equity and things like that. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the market itself changes. We don't control the market. No developer does either. So there's lots of space between where we are now and when a developer would actually be ready to turn dirt on any one of these sites. But that said, I think we've done a pretty good job of estimating what could be on these sites. And I just want to make it clear, in case there are any lawyers in the audience, I am not providing investment advice. Please don't come after me and say that you made an investment because of specifically what I said today. Although if you do and you make a lot of money, I will take credit for it. So let's start with just an overview of the market, because the market helps us to understand what it is we'd be building into, right? So looking first at just the South Kingstown residential for sale market. First thing that jumps out is your median sold price, $695, right? So obviously that's not a starter home price, but let's imagine that you were in the market for a starter home and that's your average. You would need on a 20% down basis to have about $140,000 available. A lot of money, right? You look at the months of inventory, it's well below average nationally. 2 to 3 months of inventory is tight. And because of that, it helps to sustain a 9% annual growth rate, at least over the past 12 months. Those facts alone suggest that the market is probably underserved by new for sale market rate housing, right? And because South Kingstown is largely built out, unless you're waiting on teardowns to happen, you're going to have to do something different in order to provide those markets or those units to the market. If we look at the rental market, imagine you're a developer and you see that there's a 1.6% countywide vacancy rate. What's your first thought? You can build into that, right? I mean, that it suggests that the low level of vacancies is a symptom of more demand than supply in your residential rental market. And much like for the for sale market, there's only so much land available to add those additional units, right? And if we break down rental growth rates by the different types of rental inventory, the thing that should jump out right away is what happens at the 3-bedroom level. At 4 to 12% growth rates, that's an interesting number because on the one hand, it could be families moving into larger rental properties. But at the same time, it often indicates that people are doubling up or tripling up in rental housing because it's the only way to afford the rent, right? So an expansion of rental supply here may actually help to contain some of your cost growth in the rental market. If we look at the commercial market, there weren't many listings available that I could find, and most of what I found was sort of older product. So that suggests a couple things. One is that there's probably a need for newer retail, right? Retail product would, in particular, if it's in new formats and good locations, it does the same thing that you would see residential property do for residential markets, where people move up and move from smaller homes to nicer, newer homes. Same thing happens in retail, right? And that often provides spaces for newer market entrants to enter the older buildings or enter the newer product as a flagship or some kind of interesting offering. So, looking across all of the market slices, and again, it's a very short review, but nothing in these market slices suggests that you've hit a place where building would be constrained by lack of demand. So now we're going to move into the site-specific reviews, and we're going to talk about a couple things. So first is, you've already seen how the code allows you to do more interesting things with your land. So I want to introduce a phrase that sticks in my mind when I think about this from a real estate economics and finance point of view, which is that you can think of flexibility for a developer gives you the opportunity for feasibility, and feasibility is how you get to a viable product, right? The more you are locked into limitations of what can be built on a site, the harder it is to make something new work. Whereas when you have the potential for multiple different kinds of uses that use a lot more of the land area, you not only maximize the land itself, but you provide developers with tools that they can use using their own toolkit, figure out how best to use for that specific location. So for the 121 Old Tower Hill Road building, for example, let's assume that we were going to build 27,000 gross square feet. We've got about 8,000 square feet of that is commercial, and then about 14 units of residential. So total development cost about, call it $8 million. Using some rough vacancy numbers and some pretty generous construction hold period numbers, we can generate a stabilized NOI on this building of about 550,000, which is good, right? It generates a yield on cost of about 7% and unleveraged, which means before it's the return on the equity put into the building before we look at any debt or anything else. Just think of it as pure project returns. And once we put debt on it, we get a very healthy return of 23.9%. That's a very, very strong return. Whether that pencils in real life once you have actual development costs is sort of TBD, but it's worth noting just how much benefit, even on this one site, you can see. And if you conceptually think about the application of this concept across the study area, it becomes apparent that you potentially unlock a lot of development value. And we'll go through the economic impact and fiscal impact at the end of the individual site walkthroughs. On Holly Street, we've got these townhouses, right? What's interesting here is we saw in the market before how we're constrained. We've got strong demand for residential product. But here's a way to provide quite a lot of units in a reasonably small space in a format that's not it's not highly available in South Kingstown currently. So on this basis, because we're selling these, we're essentially building at 8 million, selling for 9.5. That provides us with about $1.5 million in return. And again, we used, what I consider to be good inputs for these estimates. In fact, as a sort of internal joke, my job sometimes is to break all the pretty pictures. So Jason's team will come up with really interesting things, and it's my job to say whether or not the gods of Excel have smiled on the beautiful pictures. And so when things work out, it means that everything does in fact align. And that's the beauty of the form-based code in many ways, is that you gain optionality to make deals work that otherwise wouldn't exist. Okay. Now on Holly Street, at 30 Holly Street, we have 2 single-family homes, 2 ADUs. You'll notice here, gross sales revenue 2.9, total development cost 2.5, pretty small, thin margins. And that's because it's a small infill type development. This would be the kind of thing that would attract a local builder versus a national builder. But it's still a good product to have in the market. It's not generating a ton of revenue, but it is enough for a small scale developer to look at the site, consider it, and potentially be able to improve the margins that I've put here through changes in input costs. What are the finishes and fixtures that are actually put into the development? So, to 51 Main, we've got 2 buildings on 51 Main.
So Sean,
Yep.
just in conscientious of the time frame, can we stick with
sure.
Holly? We'll bypass the True Value site and Twisted Pizza. The council could always ask you to go back to that. But I think it's a similar scenario to your Holly Street example. So thank you.
You're welcome. So I will let's go to the consolidated economic impact, if you will. So we looked at a number of sites, and the key takeaway for us, more than anything else, is whether or not the form-based code is going to unlock not only site-specific financial returns, but also provide wider economic benefits. And it's worth noting that this was a high-level economic impact review. We didn't look at indirect and induced demand. That adds even a further layer to the assessment. But even here, what you can see in the right-hand column, look at our total development costs. We evaluated about $48 million in new potential investment. And adds about 155,000 in gross building area, 735 new construction jobs. And I guess importantly for the council, potentially supports about 182, new residents and or people who are currently maybe living with others or roommates somewhere, having new places to live, brings new school children into the district. And for the retail, you're potentially providing places for 95 jobs. So that's all good and useful. And what's not accounted for here as well is the knock-on effects of what happens if you are an adjacent neighbor, for example, to a newly developed site. In many cases, you get a property valuation bump that you didn't have to do anything for, but your property now becomes more valuable because your neighbor has redeveloped, which tends to spur further redevelopment. And that kind of redevelopment flywheel helps to kick off and sustain redevelopment activities over an entire corridor over longer periods of time. And that's important to think about. It's also useful to think as a council that, it's always difficult to raise taxes. But in this case, one of the things we're doing indirectly, it's not a direct focus of the activity of putting a new form-based code in place, but indirectly, you are also going to maximize property tax collection from sites that are currently holding smallish boxes of economic activity and allowing them to basically build to what the market would support. And that's a key distinction because your land is already fixed. You're not adding to it. You're simply allowing the land area to be used more intensively. That intensity directly translates into property tax capture, which can then go back into various programs and things that the city may need. So in just our limited example, that's about 350,000. And that gets us to our key takeaways, which is zoning reform unlocks development potential. We're generally in a good market. And I think we should, we've got enough evidence here that a good developer could pick up these assessments, run with it, and find ways to make them work in real life. That's all I've got. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Sean. Jamie, does that complete the presentation?
We just have a few things, but I think given consideration of time, it'd be an appropriate time to open it up to council questions or comments. The only remaining slides that we have are basically when the code is applicable to an applicant, when it is not. There's 4 or 5 slides associated with that, but I don't want to take any more of your time and not answer some questions you may have or comments you may have. I know Sean mentioned he was going to go over some exciting accounting numbers. I think he painted a picture that showed this is economically viable for someone to undertake the redevelopment of their property under the form-based code, and it's more advantageous to do it under a new code than it is under our existing code, and the math bears that out. But I think it may be appropriate, if you feel so, Mr. Chairman, to go through council questions at this time.
Yeah, let's open it up to council questions. It's been a good presentation. There's definitely some sort of questions we had coming in. Some I feel have been answered by what you presented here, but I still have some outstanding. I can just kick it off. All right, I'm going to jump right into it. Jason, can you come up?
I have just a brief question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation, Sean, for zooming in. Where are we getting the numbers under economic impact for new children, school-age children, and new residents? Where are we getting that data from?
I just did some quick internet searches for calculating, rules of thumb for converting from construction cost into new residential homes into children based upon the income range. If you want the specific tables, I can fish them up and send them to you.
I would say if we could have more of data-focused facts about how many children would be expected, it's really important for our neighborhood and our schools to kind of figure that out. We typically use NASDAQ or other numbers to look at economic impact and how many children are here. So Sean, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Just to follow up on Jay's point, Sean, the school department has an annual, excuse me, projection of enrollment report that, NASDAQ, that provides some information and provides some assumptions as well as history. That may be helpful for you to look at.
Excellent. Thank you.
Jason, I got a few questions for you. I want to dive into, something we know now is that under the current regulations, you can build out 30% of your lot. And under this new form-based code or new regulations that you propose, you can expand the parcel, the portion of the parcel by which you can develop. Now, is that 60%? What is that amount?
Yeah, good question. So to simplify, I keep saying you go from 30 to 90. The reality is it's a little more complicated because it's the commercial highway, which has that 30% cap, and the form-based code comes in 5 different varieties, and the lot coverage changes in each one of those. The max, the form-based code 5, is 90%, so only 10% of the site. So you go from 30 to 90 if you go from highway to commercial to form-based code zone 5.
Okay, so sort of variety. And what's the lower end?
Well, the lower end is sort of the residential area, the residential amount, and that is 60% lot coverage. That's the yellow on the map. There's not much of it, but that is there.
So these parcels will go from 30% buildable to anywhere between 60% and 90% buildable.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Now I want to ask you about existing structures. If they wish to make modifications to their building, one of the trade-offs here is you can build more, you can build out, but you also have to comply with the architectural look of it. And some of these buildings that have been around a while, if they want to make certain modifications, does that mean the entire building now has to comply with the architectural look, or is it just as to that piece that they're making a modification to that has to comply?
Right, so those buildings can make changes, a lot of little changes. It's not until essentially they're going to tear it down and rebuild it, substantial modification, or put a second story on a one-story structure. It's not until, again, the substantial modification threshold that they have to come into compliance.
And substantial modification, is that the terms used in the regulation that you're proposing?
That's right.
Is that
yeah.
a defined term?
It is. In your existing code.
It is.
Substantial modification.
Can you elaborate on that? Can you give us the definition of that?
Yeah, let's defer to Jamie.
Yeah, just for clarity, substantial addition size thresholds. We have a variation of building typology and square footage within the zones we're looking at, Transact Zone 1 through 4. So we looked at a tiered approach. So buildings that are less than 20,000 square feet could do up to a 10% addition. Would not have to adhere to the form-based code. So they could do a 20,000 square foot building, could do a 2,000 square foot addition. As of right, not adherence to the code. With one exception, if they're coming closer to the street, there are components of the code they'll have to adhere to.
Let me ask you a follow-up.
Yeah.
If someone makes a modification or addition that is in excess of the 10%, does the entire building now have to comply with the new regulation, or does just that modification have to comply with the new regulation?
Anything above those trigger points, the new addition above that would have to conform with the code. But it wouldn't require someone to tear down their entire building and rebuild it.
Okay.
So just structure-wise, 20 to 50,000 square feet, you could go up to 3,000 square feet. 50,000 to 100 100,000 square foot building, you can go up to 5,000 square feet. 100,000 square foot building, you'll have a baseline of 5,000 plus 3% of your square footage. So it's a tiered approach, because if you have a 100,000 square foot building, you couldn't just say 30% increase, which gives you 30,000 square feet, which is a third of your building. So we looked at what would be incremental. A restaurant that needed a walkout cooler could add on. A restaurant that needed a new entry vestibule could add on. A commercial venture that needed to accommodate new foot traffic associated with buying online could add that transition space to accommodate those uses. But again, substantial changes beyond those minimums would require compliance for the section that they are proposing to increase.
Let me ask you another follow-up, Jamie. So for modifications that are in excess of those minimums, that now have to comply with the new regulations, how do you sort of enforce the regulation as it relates to only that modification? That seems to me, sounds sort of difficult to do from a planning director perspective, from a planning board perspective, because now you have a building that exists, which does not have to comply with the new regulation, but now you have a modification to it, and only that modification has to comply. Now you have to enforce the code as to the modification, but not to the existing structure. That seems to me to be a little complicated. Can you talk about that?
In most instances, it becomes less complicated than just the math. If someone's adding a substantial addition to a building where they're going to need to comply with components of the code, they're also renovating the existing building in most instances. If you look at, Perry Rosso just redid his building. That was a substantial reskinning. If he didn't trigger the square footage, that building wouldn't have triggered the form-based code. But if he was adding a new entry vestibule that was in excess of those square footage, that component would be adherent to the code, and then we would have discussions about how you blend the existing building in with the new addition. And most developers look at that and want that synergy between old and new.
Just to follow up on Rory's question, if you've got a 20,000 square foot building, they can do up to 2,000 square feet in addition without triggering the new code. Does that include elevation?
If you're tearing off a roof, you're not doing 2,000 square feet. If you have a 20,000 square foot building and you're adding 20,000 square feet, you're at 40,000 square feet. If you're tearing off the roof, you're probably also tearing down some of the walls on the first floor. It doesn't mean a tear down of the building. It means, with regards to architecture, landscaping, parking layout, we would look at and reevaluate those things and be as close to compliant with the code in that scenario. We still do have waiver provisions allowed under Rhode Island law, which the form-based code would be applicable to also.
So the short answer is any elevation is going to trigger the new code.
Any elevation that goes beyond the minimums allowed. But again, doesn't require tear down, rebuild. If you're not, I guess to answer your question, Ms. Mayor, if you're not changing the first floor footprint, we can't make you move the building closer to the road. You're just adding the second floor, but when you're adding the second floor, we will work with applicants about creating that public-private space, looking at landscaping, looking at parking. If they're adding a second floor, they're going to have to increase their parking footprint, so the code associated with parking for that addition will need to be code compliant.
I think what you're suggesting is sort of an incremental development. If I have a little restaurant, can I build one in front of it? So I keep my restaurant, but I'm building another one. Yes, you can do that. The one that you build in front of it, in that setback that you were never allowed to use before, that's going to have to be code compliant. Another thing that could happen is if you have a large site and there's room for you to build an outparcel, mixed-use structure with residential above. This happens a lot. It happens a lot that someone will own a grocery store and they want to build a hotel in that area. Yes, you can keep your grocery store and you're building a hotel that's compliant with the street. I like the idea of incremental development. It means the owner doesn't have to change.
No, I think it's good, and I ask this from the sense of, I don't want to put the existing property owners in a position where they don't feel they can make any modifications, because if they do, they now have to comply with this new regulation.
Yeah,
Now
so-
we've learned that provided your addition is in excess of that minimum, then that addition will have to comply. To me, it just seems odd that in order to sort of comply with the new regulation, there's a trade-off as to, you have to have open space, something you mentioned, or storefronts. Like, how do you comply with those as it relates to only a modification?
Well, you're building something new, so that would have to comply. But what we're not asking you to do is to redo the whole site. That's the important part. To redo every parking calculation, to redo every open space calculation, to change every structure is something that would be hard for a small business person to do. It would require a new owner and a complete tear down. This code doesn't require that.
That's good. Want to make sure there's flexibility. I got a few more questions, but. There you go.
Jamie, do we have any three-story buildings on Old Tower Hill Road already?
We have buildings that read as three-story along the corridor. The storage unit behind the Volkswagen dealership equates to a three-story building. The Mazda dealer just east of the Wakefield Mall, the height of that equates to a three-story building. The new elevations for Matunix redo and Feet First, that reads as a two-story building. So there are some taller buildings in that corridor. Again, the opportunity here is the densification of allowing that second and third floor residential.
Right. Well, I'm looking at the 32 and 36 Old Tower Hill Road, which is the Go Pasta and the former At My Uncle's, great restaurant, by the way, if you've ever been to there. So that looks like a three-story mock-up, right? And then...
It was a two-story and three-story rendering.
Right, there's a couple different renderings, right? And then my second question to you, sir, can you remind me your name? I'm sorry.
Jason,
Jason, I'm so sorry. I should remember that.
you could call me Jim.
Well, two J's, So, Jason, I've gotten feedback about form-based code from business owners in town who have come to me and said, this is mandatory. We don't want this.
Right.
Right? So how would you explain to folks, maybe listening at home or even possibly the audience, why this is really good, why it's not going to affect their businesses as it is right now, and why this is an economic benefit to South Kingstown a little bit?
Yeah. Why it's really good, it's just more options. At the end of the day, it's more options. Currently, the businesses are under a zoning category from an era when they wanted to keep development small and really spread out. That's they have 1965 to 1975 regulations. Now, when it comes to South Kingstown and the residential areas, great. Keep things small and keep it spread out. I love the land trust. I love the preservation of land. But when it comes to the very few commercial areas that you have, that's your tax base. Those areas you maximize. So growth management everywhere. Believe me, that's my favorite thing. But in these areas, like Sean Bourgeois said, you only have a certain amount of square footage to make the town for the town to have a budget that keeps property taxes low. So why is this good for the business owners? Because they have more options. And why is it good for the town? Because it'll increase the tax base.
Thank you, Jason.
Jason, I got a few more. You want to jump in?
Just really quick. Hi, okay. My recollection when Jay asked about the 3 stories was when we did either a summer meeting, we looked at the scaling, we looked at multiple height buildings, and we kind of settled, I think, consensus-wise on 3 stories because it sort of was the scale of the other side of Main Street, right? If you go all the way down past the Purple Cow to the Bell Block, that is about 3. So that's how we settled there. I'm just saying it for the purpose of people may have not been at that meeting, may not remember, and that's how we looked at some much larger, and we felt like that was out of scale. That's my recollection, and that was my feeling about consensus, right? That's how we got to the 3?
That's my recollection, but I'm not sure that we settled it.
We didn't say it, we
Yeah.
said it looks sort of like this, the flow down around to the,
We were trying to match downtown Wakefield, right?
yep, so that's why, I mean, I hear the comments from people here, and I do feel like businesses don't want to get committed or boxed into something, but then I think for the long-term planning of like what we want Wakefield to potentially look like 30 to 50 years from now makes sense. It's exactly what you said. Some of what was built looks like, I said in my head, the 1970 mall pattern, right? It's look at Rhode Island Mall or Warwick Mall, Midland Mall, and they're just big buildings and huge parking lots. I think everything has sort of changed. Even how we shop retail-wise, I mean, there's much less time at stores and people shop online, even your groceries, so I think there's some of that. But then I also think long-term people want to be able to live and walk to work. It's still that same old model of residential and mixed use. So I think we have to just balance out not creating too much hurdles for businesses to revitalize and move forward, but also to be mindful that the look in 30 to 50 years is probably where we want to be as a community rather than looking like the 1970s strip mall. Just me.
So I really like some of, I prefer the nice line drawings. I like those much better. It's a lot easier to imagine these places, and I especially appreciate the municipal, or I'm looking to try to find what you called it, but it was a style that was related to like the old mills, and what was the name of that?
American Mercantile.
Right.
Yeah.
So I really liked sort of that feeling, because that to me feels like Wakefield. And so sort of on that particular idea, I just kind of want to be sure that there's not unintended consequences for this. So it's always a balancing act, when you talk about increasing, property values and all of that thing, but that also increases taxes for people that might not be able to meet those needs. And so then that brings us back to, like, what do we want as a community? Where do we want to go? Do we want to attract these really large real estate development groups that may transform our town into something that doesn't look like our town? It looks more like something that would be alongside of an interstate somewhere. So I just want to just make sure that we keep all of that in mind. And so that's basically what I had to say.
Just really quick comment. Today was the first time, after working on this project for 2 years, today was the first time I really was there at the intersection of Kingstown Road and Old Tower Hill Road, and I looked at all the new stuff. And it occurred to me for the first time, we're just facilitating a process that's already underway. I keep looking, as a planner, I'm called in to solve problems. And so I keep looking at the worst structures and the ugliest or the almost unsightly thing. But the reality is that area looks a lot better than it used to. And all we're doing is creating a new pathway for what's naturally occurring there. And I just realized that for the first time.
Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it does really look great along our main street, and all the way up. We've had some really exciting things happening.
I'm going to ask a pretty Rhode Island question. This is for you, Mr. Rabbit. What was the building type that where Critter Hut used to be before CVS? Do you remember? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I went
Or
to,
maybe no, I
I went
don't
to
know.
grad school here. I went to the university here.
Anybody remember that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So it was like a walking mall kind of thing?
Yes.
And it was very pedestrian friendly?
Yeah.
Oh man, Critter Hut, bring it back. But anyway, the point was that, we have ideas about what we should have in the past, and I think that anyone who's driven in the CVS parking lot will tell you that it's the worst parking lot design in history. To be honest with you. And so, yeah, I was just wondering because it seems like some of what we used to have before was torn down and was built into a credit union or something
Yeah.
was what we're trying to aim for right now,
Yeah.
right? That's my question.
Just, we talk about aesthetics with the form-based code, but a lot of it's just functionality. A lot of the bad stuff that's happening is they're being required to do it. I mean, this isn't, you're updating your code, again, and if we went through every part of the code, it would take us a long time. But there are parts of the code that are making bad parking lots. There's parts of the code that are making it impossible to grow a tree. There's parts of the code that are building in swampy areas and not high areas. There's 80 pages to this document, and it's improvements across the board.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Councilwoman Alley said about the fears about changing something and unintended consequences. For example, this is not going to happen in South Kingstown, but Narragansett lost their Main Street in the late 2000s because they put up condo after condo, and it led to all of the issues that they had for the past 20 years, right? And not that that's going to happen here, but just the unintended consequences of that. They thought it was a good idea at the time, building more apartments and all that, and it was a bad idea.
On the topic of unintended consequences, I'll tell you, some places, their roads can't handle the additional traffic, and that is an unintended consequence. Here, your traffic is quite bad at times in the summer. However, when we did a traffic model, and we looked at the average annual daily trips that max build-out would add to this area, and in some ways, there'd be so many more people walking and biking, there'd be peak periods where the traffic would actually be less. So one unintended consequence is not having a road network that can handle the new development. I'll tell you, that's not the case here. And the increment of change is not so great that you're going to find yourself stuck in traffic. So that's one unintended consequence. I was delighted to find, we work a lot in the Boston metro area where it is not the case, where a form-based code, where increasing development capacity is inadvisable. And here that is not. That's one unintended consequence we're not worried about.
Yeah. I need you to walk me through sort of the 50,000-foot view first, and then I do want to talk about traffic and parking as part of what you had presented. I get that this is sort of a social contract, or at least that's the way I'm looking at it. We're offering an opportunity to people in the commercial zone to do something different with their properties and allow them to make more profit. In exchange, the town gains the benefit. I'm not concerned that much about the tax issues. Whatever those numbers are, they are. But the council's approach has been, and I think the intent in going down this road was the opportunity to provide more housing. So it's an opportunity to find something in the middle between what the town, through the council, says that we need and what is available to, as an opportunity to the business owners. What I'm concerned about is how strict we're setting the bargain up to be for the property owners. One of the things that you said in your presentation that struck me was, we're turning these properties into beautiful buildings. We're not. This is private property that these people have had, some of them for generations. And I want to be certain, well, no, nothing's ever certain. I want to be at least comfortable that we've heard from the property owners who are going to be affected and make these decisions, that they're on board with this. You talked a couple of times about form-based code that's optional, and I'm not clear whether you're talking about this proposal or, I assume, because at a prior workshop, I think you'd mentioned that you've done a number of these things in other cities and towns. Are there wider options offered in other situations than the one you're proposing here?
Yeah, that's right. So we've talked other times, you could adopt an optional form-based code. So developer, landowners would have, you create an overlay. You create an overlay instead of a change in zoning. And landowners could make use of the options created by the overlay. And I'm just working in Henrico County, Virginia, and we just adopted an optional code. I've come to believe, though, that's not the right approach for South Kingstown, because growth is slower here, and you can't get it wrong. I think if we really want to see change in our life, then every single redevelopment matters. 1. 2, Henrico County is large. It's one of these counties that are probably as large as the state of Rhode Island. And they can get it wrong in areas and get it right in other areas. Here, that area is part of everybody's life. It's small, like everything in Rhode Island. I think you've only got one option, like one chance. So here, I think it's too important to not be very deliberate about that area. And the last thing is, I would hate to see piecemeal walkable development in that area, because you're putting people at danger. If you have one, just imagine one of your beautiful Main Street buildings from Main Street down over in that area, surrounded by parking lots and cars moving fast and curb cuts and tiny sidewalks. We're telling people that's I want to be wholesale about changing that environment to a safe environment. Piecemeal, I'm worried about putting people in that area without transforming the whole of it and making it all more safe.
You've got a lot more experience with this than I do, but I would assume that it would have to be piecemeal. There's going to be, if this goes through and the property owners buy into the concept, you may have CVS choose to be the first one to develop, but you're still going to have Citizens Bank next door, you're going to have the bowling alley down the street. It has to be piecemeal.
Right, yeah.
Because we're not financing this.
That's right, you're right. It is, there's a change over time. It's just, if it's optional, only 1 in 10 owners will choose it. And then when you're done, only 1 in 10 buildings transformed. What I'm saying is, if it's everyone, then when you reach that final state, that final build out, 10 out of 10 will have chosen it, and you will have created a great place.
All right. Let me give you one. Sorry,
Yeah,
Jamie.
Mr. Mayor, one of my experiences with form-based code is in another Connecticut community where I was the director of planning there. And a lot of the discussions I had with the development community about the incremental approach and the fact that this form-based code in their downtown was mandatory is, if I'm willing to make the investment, I'm okay with that, because I know the properties left, right, behind, and in front of me also have to make that investment. So if I'm going to redo, one of our examples was the Berkshire Bank. If I'm going to invest there, I know that I'm not going to have a car wash with purple and yellow vacuums next to me as the development that I just spent my life savings on or invested in you as a community. So a lot of those discussions I had with developers, and we saw a number of them in that community, is that I'm okay about getting increased density. I'm okay with increasing some of the things I have to do with regards to architecture and landscaping, because I know that my property won't be devalued by someone making a different choice next to me. And I think that's what Jason was trying to implore, that making it mandatory, it's going to take a while for this to occur. But in the end, his example of if there are 10 properties, over time, the redevelopment of those 10 properties, you will have 10 for 10. If it's optional, you may only get 5 for 10. Or you may get 1, and then the development next to that will make every other developer not choose to invest in your community.
All right, let me try a couple of the nuts and bolts parts of it. And you mentioned Berkshire. Yeah, I'm old enough and I've been around here long enough. It used to be Newport Fed. And the other example of a bank specifically that you chose was Citizens. I've done business with both. Newport Fed has a huge amount of parking for what they actually need. Every time I went there to make a deposit or to cash a check, there might be 3 or 4 cars in the parking lot. Your scenario makes a lot of sense for that property. When I go to Citizens Bank, I'm looking for a parking spot because it is always busy.
Yeah.
How does Citizens Bank sign on to this and sacrifice their parking?
They might not be able to. I mean, that's a decision they have to make. Yeah.
Okay. Because it's not all going to be foot traffic from the people living up over these buildings.
Yeah.
The 32,000 of us that are already here are going to have an expectation that they're still going to drive. Maybe I'm the only one that still drives to the bank, I don't know. That they're going to be able to continue to use these properties as we have. So that the traffic and the parking issues, I'm having real difficulty wrapping my head around how that's going to change unless the businesses themselves change. And I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not sure how I feel about it yet.
One of the reasons I had Able City East as a department and working with the planning board look at the 2 bank sites is because we're all aware, if we've been around for a long time, mergers, acquisitions, openings, closing, that industry over time, one of the primary ways to grow your portfolio is acquisition. So if Beacon acquires Citizens, they're not going to have 2 banks in town. There'll be another closure over time. And that's what we anticipated. Over time, you may see 1 or 2 more closures of those institutions in our community.
And I think that's part of the discussion too, to piggyback on Patty's comment about unintended consequences. I think in my discussions with the people in the business community about this, there's sort of a starting assumption that what we're talking about is, I've got my bank building and this is going to allow me to have my bank building, but I've got to reshape how it looks. It can go up 3 or 4 floors and have housing up above, but I'm still going to be me, so to speak. I think that's the mentality. I don't know whether the council or the town wants to promote something that's going to be the alternative. Sell your property and have some other business bulldoze what was there, put something new in, and then go up. I mean, we may or may not want that, but that's a decent possibility of what's going to happen here. I really am struggling with the concept.
So I think what I like about the mixed-use piece is we do need housing, lots of housing. We couldn't probably accommodate the number of people who want to live in South Kingstown, and you know the price of land is ridiculously high, and so this makes it so that we might be able to increase the diversity of what's offered and, you know, allow people who work at all different levels walk to their job if they work at the supermarket, or, you know, when I go to the bank, the person's like, I live in Exeter, and it's far, right? So we want people to live and work in the town, and I do hear the constraints on the businesses, but I think maybe they don't have to do it. It can't be optional in my mind, because it will become haphazard or never happen, and it'll be sort of a failed thing over time. In 50 years, they'll be like, what were they trying? So I think it needs to be mandatory, and I also hear what you're saying, then there's a risk of it becoming unsafe. If one person does it, it becomes the expectation that you can walk through these things, and then you can't really walk. So I think I'd like to hear from businesses and why. I know there are people who are against it and there are people who are for it. I'd like to keep an open mind to hear why they feel like it's a bad thing, because I think you're not required to sell your building and build a 3-story mixed-use mercantile thing, but you could, and maybe that in the end makes your piece of property more valuable. And because I don't know if I don't know, maybe that was in the slide that Sean presented, that it just increases that value of that property because I guess it can earn more money for the person, but we're also asking it to be sold and then deliver what we want, which is mixed use. So maybe that person who owns that little building is ready to move on and it's a good nest egg out. I don't know. But I also, the other counterpoint is, it is not a lot of area, right? It's about a mile down and it's a little bit the other way. So it's hard, in a large place, it could be optional, but we have to get it right for the small swath that we're trying to work through. That's why I also think it shouldn't be optional. Just me.
Jason, this distinction between mandatory and optional is interesting to me. So mandatory would mean any new build would have to comply. Optional, I interpret that as meaning you have the opportunity to elect to be subject to a set of regulations that allow you to build out more, but the trade-off being you have to have, aesthetics, open space, storefront, whatever the regulations comply if you decide to opt to elect to be subject to that. Is that how that would work?
Yeah.
And you've seen, obviously, other communities that you've worked with put in optional type of regulations, form-based code?
Right.
Have you seen any where there have been mandatory form-based code?
Yes. I mean, yes, absolutely.
That you've worked with?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the other things about optional is, if you're in Texas or you're in Virginia, you make it optional and they say yes. Well, they own 400 acres. They own 200 acres. So they will build an entire center the size of the Tower Hill Road area. And it is okay with us that everyone doesn't say yes to this, because one owner saying yes can build one of these new communities. Here, it's in the Northeast, the codes tend to be required because it's a lot of little decisions that are going to build this, and no one is enough.
But you can agree that having an optional form-based code gives the most flexibility to a building owner, or to really anybody who's either going to invest in a new building or own a building that exists already. Because in the event they want to either knock it down, build new, or just make modifications or expand, they have the option to either comply with the new regulation, optional, opt-in, so to speak, or just proceed under the existing regulations. And it sort of doesn't, I guess, foothold you into a new regulation that, you may not wish to be subject to. You have options. I feel like we talk about the form-based code, we talk about it creates opportunity, it creates options. But if you make it mandatory, it's sort of less options than it would be if you made it optional. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Just for what it's worth, when Jamestown had this discussion 20 years ago, I remember it, and the same thing was raised. It seems, there's no way around it. Jamestown said to itself, this won't get adopted unless it is purely optional. So let's just make it purely optional. I remember this. Sandy Sorlin was leading that effort. So they said, all right, well, this is the easy thing to do. Let's create an optional code, and then we'll get what we get. But then they stopped saying that because they said, we've only got a few opportunities. Really, Jamestown, the commercial area of Jamestown is really just one street, maybe two streets. And I don't think they regretted it. There's it's hard to see in Jamestown. There's only been maybe 4 new additions in 20 years. But that main street in Jamestown is now a destination, and it wasn't before. And if they had chosen optional code, I think they would have regretted it. It'd be interesting to talk to those people now. I think going mandatory there was the thing to do, and I think it's the same thing here.
One other thing I want to ask you about, you touched on it earlier in your presentation, form-based code versus form-based code controls. Can you talk a little bit about that? What is the distinction? What's the differences? Go ahead.
Yeah, so the form-based code controls means some places just took one or two pieces of the form-based code. And here we're talking about everything. A form-based code control would be, let's say, we'll decrease your parking requirement if you do X. Let's say you put a storefront on the structure. So again, they'll just take one small piece, and then they'll add to their regulations one ordinance after another, these additions. So that's form-based controls are just a ad hoc way of one ordinance after another achieving something. And again, you know, I just think it's been a long time. I think I just would hate to see it take longer for that area to become its full potential.
And just to get a sense, I guess, from how you guys project this out over time, when you talk about mandatory form-based code, you use like if you have 10 buildings, how long it takes to get to the 10. How long do you project it would take? I mean, that could take 20, could take 100 years, I guess, really, before you really reach the whole community. And after you answer that, I want to ask you, how does that compare to communities that do optional? Obviously, that period of time would take longer because not everyone will opt into it, but some change will occur over time.
I think change would happen relatively fast here. And that's because, again, your commercial zoning hasn't changed in such a long time. It's such an anachronism that when you make this change, instead of all those years of incremental form-based controls, you're making a big change fast. And that I think is good. I think that's the thing to do, because in 5 to 10 years, you'll see new development there that you never would have seen taking any other approach.
So really, no estimation of time. It's really kind of,
no, I
the
mean,
market does what it does, and you can't really predict it.
I mean, you can say, you know, the population of South Kingston has grown at this amount, and the amount of commercial you've added grows at this amount, but the form-based code changes that calculation completely. Because again, suddenly you can build residential. Everyone wants to live in South Kingstown. That's a deal changer. I mean, that would make things happen fast.
All right, thank you.
So one of the complaints that people will say, I don't know if you've driven on Bald Hill Road in Warwick, poor Bald Hill Road, you know, but it's a very commercialized district, Route 2, I think it is, and you know, it's got everything under the sun, right? It's something that we don't want Old Tower Hill Road to become, right? It's a big problem. If what you're saying is true, which is if we adopt this, that there will be wholesale change in all that time. We've seen the way that housing laws at the statewide level have changed our town already. You know, how do we make sure we're locked into this? Is it through form-based zoning, right? Is that?
Yeah. So I'll tell you that. So in Massachusetts, they have a state override of local zoning. There are many ways in Massachusetts a developer can build residential. And communities are rushing to put form-based codes in place, because if they don't, they will get nothing but residential. And here we have the Low Mod Income Housing Act. It's similar to the Massachusetts 20B legislation. But what I'm afraid is, and I am really afraid of this, if the state legislature in Rhode Island changes the laws the way Massachusetts and Connecticut does, that whole area could become residential. And I think as urban planners, we don't have enough units, we don't have enough housing units in this country. We need more housing. It's the best thing we can do. But I would hate to see this town lose its tax base to nothing but residential over there. I think you need to move. Rhode Island tends to do things eventually that Massachusetts did. And I think putting a form-based code in that area means you're going to get a good mix of commercial and residential. And if you wait too long, some state override of local zoning will turn that into just residential.
I take your point. Just for the record, though, Bald Hill Road is wicked commercial. Like, it's the most commercial road in the state. So
Yeah.
that's the point, but no biggie.
I one day I hope Bald Hill Road does a form-based code.
I was in college, I was an urban studies major at Brown, and I wrote many papers about the development of Bald Hill Road, because in the 80s, it didn't look like that. So I just want to say, I'm not quite sure, I hear concerns, so, and it's interesting to hear them, but I also want to, the mixed-use thing creates a vibe in the town that might align with the community values. What happens when you do, I don't think there's concerns about mixed use. I think it's more the structure and the requirements that everyone has to get to these architectural standards. But the mixed use piece really creates a 24-hour like town, right? Because you're going out to get food or you're coming home from work, and as opposed to like Wakefield shutters up at 8 o'clock at night. So I think that is tending to happen right now, and maybe if we increase residential, we're going to see a more 18-hour, 20-hour of people doing things and living their lives. And I think that is a more a vibe that aligns with the values that I think people would like, aspire to become down there. I don't know if there's a way to sort of modify some of the, I'm trying to hear what I hear over here, they saying make it optional, but like, is the concern the developmental architectural standards, not the idea about mixed use? Because I feel like mixed use makes sense because we don't have the right zoning, but to hamstring somebody into like, you have to build these arches or this or that, maybe those are the components that need to be fleshed out better, or we feel better about before they would get mandatory on the town.
And I've been listening and taking a lot of notes, and I think there's a lot of really good discussion, but again, the very nature of zoning is using zoning as a tool to achieve a goal of how you want your community to develop, and at what density, in which manner, and what the ultimate appearance of your community wants to be. So again, the notes from Jay, and I heard Patty and Mike and Rory saying that, the code potentially would allow wholesale change over time in a mixed-use format, but it will happen incrementally. It won't happen all at once. It's taken that commercial corridor over 60 years to develop to what we see today, and within that 60 years, there's been change on some, if not all of the properties, tear downs, rebuilds, redos, transformations. But when you make it mandatory, you're setting a vision for the future, and you're striving towards that vision in an incremental manner. To Jason King's point, we're not working with a developer who's looking at 400 acres and trying to rezone it, and whether it looks like a conventional subdivision or an industrial park or a cute new town. You have really one solid opportunity to look for, and we're using the term wholesale change. It's a change in development patterns. Terminology wholesale is probably not the proper term, but it's a change in typology of what you have today. And over the last 20 years, your community has been telling the planning department and previous councils, as well as you, that they would like change along this commercial corridor. But if you don't make it mandatory, you're going to get some of what you have now with zero architectural standards. Zero. You have been very fortunate over time, given the quality of your planning board members and your staff, to get high quality development when your standards don't necessarily mandate that. I think with the code, there's enough flexibility within the design standards to allow variation in architectural vernacular, new interpretations of a historic typology of architecture. We've already made revisions to Main Street and recognizing the existing kind of historic single-family nature of that and making it a completely different zone than it was originally set out to be. So I think, I don't want to say it will fail if you made it optional, but it will have less likelihood of success if it's optional, because you're going to lose, so it's your vision as a community, but it's not everybody's individual property owner's vision. To Rory's point, no zoning would give them the most options with their property. Existing zoning got you what you see today.
Good
Do you want more of what you have today? Because if you make it optional, you're going to get more of what you see today, and potentially things that aren't even as nice as what you've seen built recently, because you don't have those standards in place to get some of the nice things developers have took it upon themselves to do. So again, as a planning director, I've worked in multiple communities. I've looked at, I've done form-based codes for 200-300 acre properties, which are optional because they could be an industrial park or they could be something really unique and wonderful if the developer chose. But this isn't in that scenario. I think you all recognize we have a finite area of land, and it's your opportunity to potentially take it from 1960, 1970, and this kind of mixed-use venue, which allows more residential opportunities, increase investment in your community in a walkable, lively setting. And the trade-off with the density is potentially requiring a developer to not standardize their architecture, but make it more SK-like. That New England coastal mercantile look that you have, eclectic, different, but again, optional. I think you set yourself up for failure. Mandatory, you potentially can achieve it. It will occur incrementally over time. I have spoken with 4 major landowners in the community who own between 15 and 20 of the parcels. All 4 of them did not speak poorly of the form-based code. They recognized it as an opportunity to increase development opportunities. None of them discussed optional with me. They understood that if it's mandatory, their primary concerns were, if I change the windows, do I have to tear down my building? Absolutely not. If I repaint my building, do I have to tear it down and do the form-based code thing? No. If I add dog shed dormers to my roof, do I have to adhere to the code? No. These are for substantial renovations and additions. So if your Beacon Bank, which was Berkshire, and New Bank goes in there, repaints the building, they don't have to do a thing other than repaint their building. If they start to modify the parking lot, add another drive-through teller, add a bump out to the building, components of it would have to adhere to it. But you're incrementally getting to that vision that we're trying to lay out for you. So I'll be quiet now.
Let me ask you a follow-up, Jamie. And I'm just sort of thinking this through. If it's optional, you almost have an incentive to opt in because you'll be able to build out more on your lot, right? The trade-off being more stringent type of standards to comply with, I would assume. That would be the only reason by which someone would decide, I'm not going to elect to be subject to this new set of regulations. I'm going to be subject to what's currently in place, only allowing me to build out 30%. Do you agree with that? To me, it seems like...
No,
Is there not a natural incentive to be subject to an optional regulation that allows you to build out more?
My experience with the form-based code on the mandatory and optional basis is in the optional opportunity, the landowner will take the path of least resistance that is the quickest return on their financial investment. They may not wait for the developer to offer them the price to increase their density. They may take the near-term return on investment of another fast food restaurant who wants to come to this community, a car wash who wants to come to this community, another large multinational gas station with 10 pump islands and a 180-foot canopy. Because if you make it optional, those are the low-hanging fruits that are going to come to your community. You will get another gas station, you will get more fast food services, you will get more tire and lube facilities. You may not get that mixed use, because I can sell tomorrow to the car wash. I may have to wait a year or two for reinvestment of a much larger project.
But they can also.
And that's been
do-
my experience.
But they can also do that right now, and we wouldn't have any options anyway, correct?
If you, under the present code, they could do that right now, yes.
That's what but the fact that we don't have the car washes downtown, those examples that you just gave, to me is an indication that it's not an immediate concern. It might be down the road.
No, to me as a planning director, those are the inquiries we're receiving daily. Well, I shouldn't say daily, weekly and monthly. What you've discussed here is you have limited commercial space. If you look, there's nothing for sale on this corridor right now. But there are developers offering money to existing landowners for the uses I've just mentioned. Those landowners have chosen not to sell at this time.
But if all they're interested in is the quickest buck, why haven't they?
Because it's not at their price point yet, right? Everyone's got a number on an envelope.
I don't disagree.
And some of the numbers have been fairly substantial.
I don't disagree with the concept that we need to do something.
Yeah.
In part because of what you said about the opportunity for people to come in and use the current commercial code. In part because of what Jason said with respect to what happened in Massachusetts, and it may creep towards Rhode Island as things tend to do. And we don't want it imposed on us from Providence. I get that. But getting it right matters greatly. Part of what you said was that this will allow people to do it, and I think the concern, particularly in the business community, is the perception of allowing something and dictating something.
We get I'm trying to make the acronym for that and look at that. It's a code that allows you to continue to operate in the manner in which you operated. No required to change. So if you're a bank, you can be a bank. If you're a gas station, you can be a gas station. If you're a bowling alley, it can be a bowling alley. And you can expand to certain parameters. You can do additions. You can repaint, refacade, redo your building.
I get
It's
that.
just the redevelopment. How do you want the properties to be redeveloped? And I think there's a sentiment in this community of your residents, where you're approaching 32,000 people, that they would like to see new development or redevelopment in this corridor to occur in a different venue than it has over the last 30 or 40 years.
That I don't disagree with. What I'm trying to probe with my questions is whether it's simply an either-or proposition, or if there's some middle ground that works for the property owners and works for us, the town.
I'm not sure what middle,
So I think if we hear if there are property owners here who might, or somebody might tell you what the concerns are. Like I said, it feels like there's parts of it that there sounds like 5 people are agreeing on, but then I think there are concerns expressed by several people about, an undue burden on people's property, right? I don't want to have awnings, I don't want to have arches, I don't want to have a public space, whatever is required. Then that drives up the cost. So we have to figure out, that's what I'm just summarizing what I'm hearing. Is there a sweet spot in the middle that has more consensus, I guess? But we don't know what the things that they might they might report out as burdensome. There was somebody who raised their hand, so anyway.
And I just wanted to add, I think this is the policy area where we need input from the council. Completely optional may not work because you may not ever see the change happen. Completely mandatory is overly burdensome on the property owners. Where do we find that nice center in between where it encourages the development to happen within a reasonable span of time?
We're going to go to Andy Tights now.
Yeah, I just would like to add my support for the position that an optional ordinance won't work. I've been doing this for a long time, even in South Kingstown, back when in the early 90s with the ordinance rewritten there. And I've been involved in a lot of towns, and some communities have various optional ordinances. Some have one community has a voluntary historic district. And I think the problem is not so much the individual, because there are some individuals who will otherwise say, okay, well, I'll take this voluntary thing and I'll do it. But they're worried about their neighbors. That's the problem. I mean, all zoning is telling people what to do with their property. It is an exercise of the police power, but it's based on the idea that if we just don't have any at all, if we let people do whatever they want with their property, then yes, you can invest a lot and build your nice home and someone can have a pig farm next to you. So we have one concept of zoning, which is our classic Euclidean zoning, which breaks up communities into different zones and regulates the use there. This is a different kind as far as because it's regulating the form, so it's indirectly relating the use. But it's still the same thing. We're still dividing into zones. We have 4 subzones. We can call them transects, but they're zones. And yes, we're doing it. And the advantage of doing it as an ordinance that's required is that people can look at what they do with their own property and be comfortable that the next door neighbor isn't going to do something else. Yeah, maybe I'm going to build the nice mixed use thing, but if then somebody builds the big gas station right next to me, then it's going to screw my business. None of my tenants are going to want to live there looking out at this gas station and hearing the noise all along. So I think that's the reason to make it not optional, not because of what an individual property owner would do for themselves, but because what they would do, because what they think or have confidence in what their neighbors can or can't do, which is kind of one of the key points of the zoning. So I don't think that optional will work. If there are issues with, is it too stringent on the design? Are we too monochromatic on our design stuff? Those are things certainly, want to get that feedback. And if you don't want it at all, that's fine too. But I don't think an optional one will do any good in the long run, and probably cause more harm in the long run, because it'll be such a hodgepodge.
Thank you, Andy. Okay. So we do want to, open it up, allow the public to speak on this. We want to hear from you. Excellent presentation, great engagement between the council, planning director Jason King. Sean, thank you. But now, public, I invite you to come on up. Anyone who wishes to speak, we just ask that you identify yourself. We're going to limit you to 5 minutes. When you begin speaking, this clock will begin counting down.
Okay. My name's Tom Rutliff. And I want to give you a little perspective from somebody sitting there. I'm perplexed, I'm disappointed that this entire conversation has been about the acute sensitivity of the changes to the property owners. I get that, it's vital, it's important, but I don't recall one question or any interest in what the tax benefits would be. And I think part of your job is to try to grow the tax base in this town. And it's been demonstrated through the arithmetic, and I know that was complicated, that this is attractive and has the potential for increasing the tax base. And particularly at this time, I think it's something the council should have taken to heart and pursued with more vigor. I didn't see any pursuit of it at all. Another point, and I think Brian first started to talk about this, is that it's been proposed that a certain threshold establishes what's grandfathered and what's not. It's black or it's white. At least from my perspective, this is the start of a negotiation, and it's a negotiation with the council. So if you feel that the code, this is just me speaking, is too restrictive in some regards. I think you can slide that dial a little bit over so that it's not just black and white, or if it is black and white, you can vary, not substantially, but vary where the grandfathering kicks in. And I'd prefer to see your thoughts along those lines as opposed to making it optional. This whole thing started when property owners on Old Tower Hill Road made comments that the town council was not listening to their concerns. I was part of the survey. I heard it directly from these people, and they were very critical of you guys. You turned around and you funded this study, and I think it's a very good study. But I'm afraid now, from what I've heard tonight, that it seems you're prepared to just plow it under and make it optional, and I just don't think that's a good approach. So I hope you take my comments as constructive. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Susan Marcus, and I don't want to sound like an English teacher, but I think I've been listening to this conversation, and I think there's a semantic problem here. There's been a discussion of what's optional and what's mandatory. And optional sounds so much better, right? It gives you freedom to do whatever you want. But inside the mandatory code that Jason has described is all kinds of flexibility and the opportunity to do all kinds of things that give you options for something better. So I just wanted to say, I think we need to move away from this optional mandatory thing, because mandatory sounds like it's limiting what you're doing. And in fact, this mandatory code is offering you flexibility and opportunity to do something that you can't do now. So that's just my English, my semantic comment.
Thank you.
Mike Agus. I share some of Tom's frustration here. I sent you guys a letter and explained that the benefits to the residents of the 5 big ideas that are in the report: nice places, welcoming community, safe streets, connection with nature, and an economic engine that will drive growth, business growth, opportunity, jobs, and so forth. Okay, that's what we're aiming towards. I also presented the business case that investors should be looking at if they're going to, in fact, invest. And in the example, in the report that Sean wrote, he took a 3/4 acre piece of property in that district and said, under the current zoning, you can build a 10,000 square foot building, okay? And you can get so many dollars per square foot of rent, and you can generate a net operating income. And it turns out that in his example, it's $100,000, okay? If you make an investment and you transform that community and you add 3 stories of residential rental, twice the size of the commercial space, where you get more than twice the space because it's more desirable space, more people will want to come. There's people that live upstairs that are also going to patronize the places. The value of that property increases, the net operating income of that property increases by a factor of 15. What you're making $1 million a year off of, you're going to make $15 million a year off that same piece of property because the zoning has changed and somebody invested. Okay, they invested $20 million in that property. That building is now worth $30 million. Okay, so they made a $10 million profit. They had to put $20 million down. Okay, they actually put $7 million down. They borrowed $13 million, and they still made money. A nice return on investment. Are you going to make that investment if the person next door to you does not have to comply with that zoning and they're going to expand their building and perpetuate more of the same? You'll never do that. You need that protection that we talked about, that somebody is not going to build something that's undesirable and detracts from the value and adds to the risk of the investment that you're making. That's mandatory, and options are just not, they're just, if you want the new zoning to take effect, there is no option but mandatory. It won't happen otherwise. It's plain and simple. I wouldn't make that investment, would you? That's it.
Thank you, Mike.
You bet.
Robert South, how are you tonight? So I can appreciate the vision here, and I actually agree with some of the vision. I'd like to address a couple of things. How about use codes, Jamie? What are we going to do with use codes? Because some of the existing businesses in the district actually would become non-conforming use, which we know the legal problems with that designation.
Yeah, I mentioned I have spoken with a number of the property owners within the community. There are the need to further evaluate the interpretation of some of the uses, and Robert's point is valid. Existing bowling alleys are kind of fall within the restaurant, bar, service type industry. We can clarify items like that to make sure that entertainment in its present zone, such as a bowling alley or that type of, whether it's indoor, golf simulators or bowling alley or that type of entity, is clear. There was no intention under the terminology used in the use code to make a facility like that non-conforming. And again, I've had conversations with Robert, and I absolutely appreciate the time he spent reading the code.
They've been very productive.
And
Yeah.
meeting with our department to look at the finite details in the code such as that, where my interpretation of the code is he would be conforming, but to his point, planning directors change, councils change, planning staff changes to make it clear that those uses, there aren't, to your point, unintended consequences, that you take a business that you intended clearly to be part of the existing fabric and potentially the expansion of that facility or fabric, to make sure it's clear and concise in the code. And I've spoken with him, we've exchanged emails, and I've been working on some revisions to the language specific to entertainment facilities that are associated with bar and restaurant venues.
Yeah, because it is conceivable now with this form-based code that I tear the building down, I build a multi-use building, I include a 12-lane bowling center with a microbrewery in it and a restaurant. So that's why I was concerned about that. But it's not just my use. I think there's some other uses in town too that may be non-conforming use, but that can be addressed probably by other people. So I'm making some assumptions. If there's a redevelopment or renovation to an existing building, the owners are not going to have to comply with FBC, basically, unless we exceed certain limits. Correct? Okay. The scope of the renovation or the amount of money expenditure do not trigger FBC in any way.
Correct.
Okay. We can convert the building to another permitted use without FBC. In other words, I could take my existing building. I appreciate everybody's concern about the property owners making money. It's really nice. But I may actually want to pass the building down to another generation, and let's say that the use changes. It's not going to be tied into FBC?
Correct.
Okay. I understand a complete tear down triggers FBC.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I do see it as very futuristic, and it's decades futuristic. I think we just need to proceed with caution. I think we need to be concerned about the existing businesses there. People use the area for their daily shopping needs, supplies, recreation, purchases, etc. The area does provide significant employment. I think what's going to happen here, that in time, let's see here. Well, I feel it should be based strictly on newer replacement development. Trying to see if I have anything else. As far as architectural styles, you're talking coastal and mill. I do think that maybe we should consider some other styles. I think, encourage mixed use, but maybe make it optional as far as residential development. I think that's it for now. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good evening, Joe Veely. Shouldn't surprise anybody that this will be quick and basic. So, a couple of things I think you should just consider. So, when you apply design standards, you apply control. Keep that in mind while you're considering all this. When a person buys property, it comes with certain rights. I want you to be careful that those rights don't get limited by this. And then I think, this is me personally, if one parcel becomes non-conforming because of this, you need to think long and hard. I think this has potentially it could be a very good idea and should reshape that. It's going to take years, but it should reshape that whole district. And I agree for the better. I'm just not sold on the, I'm trying to think of a nice way of saying ramming it through.
Heavy-handedness?
No, just, I get why the feeling is with planning and staff that optional can be a sort of a tough road because you have to consider the neighbors, right? If somebody does this, somebody develops in this way, and the next door doesn't, you do have to consider that person's rights too. So, I said I'd be quick. Just keep these things in mind as you're considering all this. It has the potential to be a very good thing, but you want to be careful about, in my opinion, about infringing on people's rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Good evening. My name's Harold Thomas. I'm a business owner in South Kingston. I'm one of those non-conforming structures that we own a gas station. Everybody loves gas stations. Family business. I've been paying taxes, my family, since 1969 on the property. I'm the second generation. We'd like to see a third generation. We met here back in 2018 with a totally different EDC committee at the time, and mixed use was a great idea. The problem I have is we are blue-collar industry. I cannot get clerks, I cannot get bodymen, I cannot get service techs. I employ 16 people in this town. They all have health coverage, 401ks. My next generation, I have 5 children, 4 boys, 1 daughter. None of them want to go into my industry. What do I do? Optional will not work. It has to be mandatory. But being mandatory, people may in. I want to retire. I am not going to work till I'm 70 like my father. It would be great to pass it on to another generation. You are, and true, people always approach me trying to buy my property for peanuts. That's my blood, sweat, and equity in that place. I think this is a great idea. I don't know how it's going to work with the road. I came here today. There was a major accident, somebody pulling in Chipotle. Airbags deployed, rescue on scene. The state redid that road. They put in those medians to slow the traffic down. It does not work. South Kingston's Finest gives tickets daily. I work there 7 days a week. So I think optional's not going to work. I think you have great ideas. The Mercantile is more South Kingston, if you go back to David Gates. David Gates will tell you he has mercantile stuff from 1800s when it was horse and buggy. I don't like being a non-complying use. I was in the SMD when I lived on Albro Lane. I had to jump through hoops. I wanted to put an addition to expand my collision facility. I had to jump through hoops through the technical review committee, which I never got out of, and I had to change my whole scope. So I think we really need to decide what's compliant, non-compliant, and I think people that are in this district that are non-compliant should be exempt. Because if I want to sell to another gas station, that's my prerogative. I pay taxes, they're never late, and I raised a family in this town, and I like to have my kids come back, which none of them live here now. So think hard. I don't want to leave South Kingston, but I'll be honest with you, you need to really consider this. And I would love to talk to you. I've never met you. I've been in that place a long time, and I know Old Tower Hill Road very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. My name's Susan Mittendorf, and I just wanted to speak a little bit. I have a couple points to make about the fact that this is going to increase the amount of workforce housing, and to remind everybody that that was a big thing on the agenda. So just a couple of points. The changes will facilitate the development of workforce housing. In all likelihood, the housing and buildings in this area using the form-based code criteria will be the style of housing that will be modestly priced in comparison to the single-family homes that we now have that dominate the town's housing. This should attract people working in this area to be able to live in this area, which has always been a goal, I know, of the council and the town. The units will be close to local businesses, government offices, and hospitals, to name a few. And of those people who are employed in those businesses may be able to live in this town. The new housing units will increase tax revenue by adding the value of the upper story housing units to the structures that are now generally restricted to one-story commercial buildings under the current zoning. The new housing units will encourage sustainable living by creating housing units that are within the walkable distances of much of the towns that have direct access to bus routes and the bike path. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mackenzie McBurney, Hinckley Allen. I'm here on behalf of my client, Costanza Realty LLC. I know that the council has received 3 letters from us over the course of the past several months, so I will not reiterate the things that are in there. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things I heard tonight. I heard reference time and again to a developer. A good developer could find ways to make it work. We ask for much more from the developer. The code will be irresistible for developers. Well, my client isn't a developer. It's a legacy owner of commercial parcels in the commercial highway district that it rents to businesses to keep the town's commercial core vibrant. And if its property needs renovating, if my client has a massive flood or there's a fire there, and it needs to rebuild, it can't bear the cost of complying with this form-based code. So as Councilperson Marin said, does my client sell its property then? Does it have to give it to a developer so a developer can do the things that are required under this code? We heard a lot tonight about unintended consequences as well. Councilperson Alley brought that up. And some of the members of the public just spoke about how the uses under the form-based code don't line up with the uses under the current zoning ordinance. So everyday business uses just disappear. Indoor sports facilities, gas stations, self-storage, those are no longer allowed under the form-based code. So what are we left with? A commercial area where you can't fill your car up with gas? And look, if the real goal here, as many of you discussed, Councilperson Bergner discussed it, if the goal here is to allow for more residential development in the commercial highway district, there's a way to do that that isn't through this form-based code. I think Mr. Fish wrote a letter to the council detailing how that could happen. One of my letters also detailed it. So we can get there without tearing everything up and starting over. Costanza Realty has been a responsible, stable, commercial property owner in this town for decades, and they're not against change. Despite what you might hear about them, they're not against change. They're not only interested in their financial goals. I want to urge the council to take a step back, slow down, consider some of the other options that we heard tonight, make this a transparent process, and get it right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Kirk Brown. I'm a residential property owner here. I don't own any commercial, so I don't really have a good concept of what that's like. But a lot of folks have been talking about rights and talking about sort of optionality and you know, mandatory versus optional. And even if you own a residential property, with those rights that you have as a property owner, there's responsibilities, there's rules, there's restrictions. It's not that anybody who owns property has, you know, free reign to do whatever they want. Like if I want to add addition to my property, there's, you know, rainwater allowances. I have to make sure that I'm not too close to the abutting properties. There's all sorts of restrictions based on zoning. So to expect a new zoning to not have some form of restriction doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because that's just sort of the nature of the beast. But that's just sort of how I see it. The other piece that I feel a little uncomfortable up here because I'm probably one of the younger people in the room. I'm in my 30s, and I heard the gentleman speak about his children who don't live here anymore, and how he wants them to be able to move back. And I just wanted to speak to how hard it is to live in a town like this, as young as I am, and as, like, you know, young folks trying to live here. Because if you're not established, if you don't have a 20-year career, if you haven't been a property owner, of, you know, commercial business owner or a property owner for decades, it is incredibly difficult to afford living down here. And so we can talk numbers and we can talk sort of like hypotheticals and sketch-ups of like what it would look like with residential, but keep in mind putting housing in a place that already has a bus route, that already is right where people would work. It's right next to the grocery stores where you can get fresh food very easily. You wouldn't have to fill up your car because you don't need to use your car when you get home from work to get food and other things that you're looking to do in your time off. So it really is the right kind of housing for people who are younger or people like me, where, you know, I'm fine living on a third story, you know, a walk up or whatever is okay. Maybe eventually when it's time for me to retire, I need that, you know, single story ranch, you know, out a little bit away from the hustle and bustle of downtown Wakefield. That's fine. That housing should also exist. But I believe one of the council members was speaking to the mix of housing and increasing the optionality of the housing. And what you do when you create the kind of housing in this form-based code is you're incentivizing folks who are younger, who want to walk to get their groceries, who want to walk to go to a restaurant, who want to walk to work perhaps. You're giving them an opportunity to live in this community and feel like they are accepted in this community. And so we can talk about numbers as long as we want. I think the numbers are very compelling, but if we want to talk about like what it really means to make this kind of change, there's going to be a lot of lives that are positively impacted by a change like this. And so don't lose sight of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else in the audience wish to speak?
Hello, my name is Marjorie Stevens. I'm a resident here. I've been living here in Rhode Island since 1982, right in the area. Probably there are people in this room that remember Troy West. Okay, Troy West was promoting the same idea, but it was like 20 years ago. So here we are again. Here we are again. And I really hope that the council will take into consideration that this idea is not new, that it should be considered, and you should ask the residents. You know, this is a small showing here, and I really do wish that there were more people here, residents, to voice their opinions on it. I don't know huge amounts about zoning and various things, but I do know that and to keep this community vital and not just kind of stuck like Route 1 is. And I'm not worried about, well, I am worried about it being like Route 2. I think that you should highly consider the mandatory option and go around and ask the community members what they want. Ask the business members what they want. And so that's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anyone else in the audience wish to speak? If so, I invite you to just come on up. All right, well, some very good input from the audience. I appreciate you all showing up. It helps put things into perspective. You are all the affected property owners that are within this area that we're considering making some zoning changes to, so can't ask for better input as to the affected parties than what we got here tonight, so we appreciate that. It's been a good presentation. There's been a lot of good points made, a lot of good questions asked by council members. Obviously, you know, this is going to take some consideration, more deliberation from us, sort of think through, you know, what exactly we want to do, what do we want the impact to be. But I'm thinking hopefully that maybe we could put this on the town manager report at the second meeting in April, just to kind of loop back with the council as to where are we at that point, what are next steps, and where to go from here. And a draft of the ordinance would be helpful as well.
It's going to be an updated draft.
Jason King, come on up. Jamie Rabb, this is a question for you, but Jason's going to be on standby here. We'd like to have an updated draft of the ordinance in front of us before that April 27th meeting.
Yeah, we've been working off the July 2025 code. We have some suggested revisions that were made by the planning board. We can incorporate those into an updated version and revise that date. And we
Can we do it by April 27th?
We should be able to, it's the 9th now, we should be able to accomplish that.
Great.
With the tweaks, is that going to be the ordinance? Something that satisfies the lawyers?
Minus maybe a tweak of a setback from 12 to 15 feet or 16 to 18 feet, yes.
I mean, are some of the tweaks you're considering things that, like Mr. Thomas brought up, you know, grandfathering gas stations, or are those?
No idea.
So to answer that, there were some statements made tonight that aren't necessarily factual. If a building burns down, you are allowed to replace it without adherence to the form-based code. So let's say that if my building burns down, I lose. No, you get to rebuild. Or if someone owns a gas station and wants to sell the gas station, someone can buy that gas station and operate it as a gas station. We are not regulating someone out of business if you adopt this code. There are regulations associated with the expansion of existing buildings. So again, we'll look carefully at the comments that were made tonight. We'll discuss them with the planning board, and we'll look at making the necessary revisions. You know, I'm not doing, our department isn't doing this in a vacuum. We're doing it with insight and conversations from the planning board. So we'll be meeting at a workshop next week, and I'll bring up some of these items and look for some direction from them.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, it's going to bring us to the end here.
Motion to adjourn.
Do we need a motion? No action taken.
Take that back.
Thank you all for coming. Enjoy your evening. Have a good weekend, and we look forward to next step in this process here.